Hello everyone and welcome. We are diving headfirst into some of the craziest, most mind-bending stories you've ever heard. I'm talking about the top 10 bizarre aviation mysteries that will absolutely blow your mind. We're not talking about fiction here. These are all 100% true stories, real events that have left investigators, experts, and pretty much everyone else scratching their heads for years, sometimes even decades. We've got everything from ghost planes and disappearing jets to a guy who literally jumped out of a plane with a bag full of cash and was never seen again. These are the kinds of stories that make you think, wait, did that really happen? And the answer is, yes, it's the stuff of Hollywood movies, but it happened in real life. We're going to explore tales that have become modern legends, mysteries that continue to fuel speculation, and from the vast emptiness of the ocean to the highest peaks of the Andes, these events are as chilling as they are fascinating. As we go through these, I want to hear from you. If you know of any other strange, mysterious, or just plain weird aviation stories that we don't cover, please drop them in the comments below. Alright, let's kick things off with a mystery that is still so fresh in our minds, it's just unbelievable. I'm talking about Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, or MH370. On March 8, 2014, a massive Boeing 777 takes off from Kuala Lumpur, heading to Beijing. It's a routine overnight flight, filled with 239 people. Families, business travelers, crew members. Everything seems completely normal. The pilot says goodnight to Malaysian air traffic control. Good night, Malaysian 370, and then nothing. Just silence. The plane just vanishes from civilian radar. Not a blip, not a distress call, not a single sign of trouble. It's like it was erased from the sky. Investigators later discovered that the plane's transponder was turned off, and it made a sharp turn, flying for hours in a completely different direction. Military radar tracked it for a bit, but then it was gone, heading out over the vast, empty Indian Ocean. How does a 200-foot-long airplane just disappear in the modern age of technology? It's a question that haunts everyone involved. The search that followed was the largest and most expensive in aviation history. We're talking ships, planes, and submarines from dozens of countries, scouring millions of square miles of ocean floor. It was a massive, international effort, a race against time to find the black boxes, to find any clue. But for years, they found almost nothing. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack the size of a continent. The sheer scale of the search area is hard to even comprehend. Then, pieces started washing up. A flaperon here, a piece of the cabin there, found on the shores of Africa, thousands of miles away from where the search was concentrated. These fragments confirmed that the plane did go down in the Indian Ocean, but they didn't tell us why or how. Was it a deliberate act by the pilot? A catastrophic mechanical failure that nobody could report? A hijacking gone wrong? Every theory you can imagine has been floated, from the plausible to the straight-up bizarre. To this day, the main wreckage has never been found. The black boxes, which hold the key to what happened in the cockpit, are still somewhere at the bottom of the ocean. For the families of the 239 people on board, it's an unending nightmare. They have no closure, no answers, just a gaping hole of uncertainty. MH370 isn't just a mystery. It's a modern tragedy that reminds us that even with all our technology, the world can still swallow a giant airplane whole, leaving behind nothing but questions. Okay, this next one is genuinely chilling. It sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. It's the story of Helios Airways Flight 522, which became known as the Ghost Plane. On August 14, 2005, this Boeing 737 took off from Cyprus, heading to Athens, Greece. But shortly after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. The airline lost radio contact with the flight. They tried calling again and again, but the cockpit was silent. The plane just kept flying, climbing to its cruising altitude as if everything was normal. Worried, the Greek authorities scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets to intercept the plane. What the fighter pilots saw was just bone-chilling. They pulled up alongside the massive passenger jet and looked into the cockpit. The captain's seat was empty. The co-pilot was slumped over the controls, motionless. They flew past the passenger windows and saw everyone inside, just sitting there. Oxygen masks were dangling from the ceiling, but the passengers were completely still, seemingly unconscious or worse. It was a plane full of people, flying on autopilot, with no one awake. The fighter pilots followed this ghost plane for over an hour as it flew on its pre-programmed route. Can you imagine the horror of that? Watching a plane full of people, knowing something is catastrophically wrong, but being completely powerless to help. The plane circled over Athens on autopilot until it eventually ran out of fuel. It was a terrifying slow-motion disaster waiting to happen. The F-16 pilots could only watch as the engines flamed out one by one. Then, something even stranger happened. Just before the plane began its final descent, the fighter pilots saw someone move in the cockpit. It was a flight attendant, Andreas Prodromo. He had somehow remained conscious and had made his way to the flight deck. He was seen trying to take control of the plane. He even waved at the F-16s. But he wasn't a pilot, and it was far too late. He desperately tried to control the aircraft, but with no fuel and no training, the situation was hopeless. The plane crashed into a hillside near Grammatiko, Greece, killing all 121 people on board. The investigation later revealed the cause, and it was a simple, tragic mistake. A maintenance crew had left the cabin pressurization switch on manual instead of auto after a check. As the plane climbed, the cabin never pressurized. The crew and passengers slowly succumbed to hypoxia, a lack of oxygen, without even realizing what was happening. The alarms that should have warned them were misinterpreted as a different, less critical issue. It's a terrifying reminder of how one small switch can lead to an unimaginable tragedy. All right, from a technical mystery to a straight-up, old-fashioned, Hollywood-style heist. This is the story of D.B. Cooper, and it is legendary. It's the night before Thanksgiving, 1971. A man who bought a ticket under the name Dan Cooper boards a Northwest Orient Airlines flight in Portland, Oregon, heading to Seattle. He's described as being quiet, in his mid-40s, wearing a business suit with a black tie. He orders a bourbon and soda. He looks like any other businessman on a routine flight. But then, he calmly passes a note to a flight attendant. Thinking it's just his phone number, she puts it in her pocket. He leans over and says, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The note detailed his demand: $200,000 in negotiable American currency, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane upon arrival. The flight attendant went to the cockpit, and the pilot immediately radioed the authorities. The airline decided to cooperate fully. Nobody wanted to mess with a bomb. The plane landed in Seattle, and the exchange went off without a hitch. The passengers were released, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. The authorities delivered a knapsack full of cash, $20 bills, just as he'd requested, and the 4 parachutes. The plane was refueled, and Cooper gave the pilot his new flight plan: fly towards Mexico City, low and slow, at an altitude of 10,000 feet with the landing gear down. It was a very specific and very strange set of instructions. Sometime after 8 p.m., in the middle of a raging thunderstorm over the rugged wilderness of southwestern Washington, D.B. Cooper did the unthinkable. He went to the rear of the plane, lowered the aft air stair, a staircase at the back of the Boeing 727, and with the money strapped to him, he jumped out into the freezing rainy night. He just disappeared. The Air Force jets that were tailing the plane didn't see a thing. It was a perfect escape, a jump into darkness and legend. The FBI launched one of the most extensive and long-running investigations in its history, codenamed Norjack. They searched the woods, interviewed hundreds of suspects, but found nothing. For years, there was no sign of Cooper or the money. Then, in 1980, a young boy found a rotting package containing nearly $6,000 of the ransom money on the banks of the Columbia River. But that just deepened the mystery. Was he alive? Did he die in the jump? To this day, the D.B. Cooper case remains the only unsolved air piracy in American aviation history. He's a folk hero to some, a criminal to others, but a complete mystery to all. Let's turn back the clock for this one. all the way to 1947. This story is so strange, the final clue just makes it even more mysterious. We're talking about the Stardust, a British South American Airways plane. It was an Avro Lancastrian, which was basically a converted World War II bomber. On August 2nd, 1947, it took off from Buenos Aires, Argentina, heading for Santiago, Chile. A key part of this journey was crossing the formidable Andes Mountains. A tough flight, but a routine one for the experienced crew. The flight was captained by a decorated war pilot, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. The weather wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. As the plane neared its destination in Santiago, it radioed in a message. The air traffic controller on the ground was expecting a standard arrival update. Instead, he received a very clear, but very bizarre, final message in Morse code. The radio operator on the Stardust tapped out one single cryptic word, Stendek. The controller in Santiago asked them to repeat the message, thinking he misheard. The Stardust's radio operator sent it again, Stendec. And then, silence. The plane never arrived in Santiago. It had vanished somewhere over the massive snow-covered Andes. Search parties were sent out immediately, but they found absolutely nothing. No wreckage, no survivors, no sign of the plane or the 11 people on board. It was as if the mountains had swallowed it whole. For over 50 years, the disappearance of the Stardust and the meaning of Stendek became one of aviation's greatest puzzles. Theories ran wild. Was Stendek an anagram, a secret code? Did it mean starting descent? Or was it something more sinister, like an encounter with a UFO? The mystery fueled books, documentaries, and endless speculation. The word itself is just so odd. It doesn't seem to mean anything, which is what made it so captivating. People were obsessed with cracking the code. Then, in the late 1990s, the mystery began to unravel. Two Argentinian mountaineers climbing Mount Tupungato discovered wreckage from the plane. This led to an official expedition, and they found more debris, including engine parts and, tragically, human remains. The investigation concluded that the crew, likely flying in the high-altitude jet stream, which wasn't well understood at the time, thought they had already cleared the Andes. They began their descent, thinking they were over the plains of Chile, but instead flew straight into the side of the mountain. The plane was instantly buried in a glacier, which is why it wasn't found for 50 years. As for Stendek, the most likely theory is that it was a garbled transmission of the phrase Saint End, meaning starting descent, or just a result of the radio operator's hand getting shaky from hypoxia. A simple explanation for a 50-year-old mystery. This next story isn't a mystery in the what happened sense, but a horrifying look at how a series of small, unfortunate events can lead to the deadliest accident in aviation history. I'm talking about the Tenerife airport disaster. It's March 27th, 1977. The airport on the island of Gran Canaria has been shut down due to a bomb threat, so all incoming flights are being diverted to the much smaller Los Rodeos airport on the neighboring island of Tenerife. This tiny airport is not equipped for this chaos. The airport quickly becomes a parking lot for giant jumbo jets. Two of them are a KLM Boeing 747 and a Pan Am Boeing 747. They are parked on the main taxiway, waiting for Gran Canaria to reopen. The weather at Tenerife starts to get really bad. A thick fog rolls in, reducing visibility to almost zero. You couldn't see a few hundred feet in front of you. This is where the chain of disastrous events begins. It's a perfect storm of bad luck, bad timing, and miscommunication. Finally, the other airport reopens. The KLM plane, which is blocking the Pan Am plane, gets clearance to taxi down the runway, make a 180-degree turn, and prepare for takeoff. The Pan Am jet is told to follow it down the runway and exit onto a side taxiway to clear the path. But here's the problem. In the thick fog, the Pan Am crew can't see the taxiway signs clearly and misses their turn. At the same time, the KLM captain, who is a very senior and respected pilot but is anxious to get going, starts his takeoff roll without getting final explicit clearance from the tower. The air traffic controllers and the Pan Am crew both try to tell him to stop. There are frantic messages over the radio, but they get garbled. A critical transmission from the Pan Am pilot saying we are still taxiing down the runway gets blocked by another transmission, creating a squeal that the KLM cockpit hears instead of the words. The KLM captain, believing the runway is clear, pushes the throttles to full power. He's now hurtling down the foggy runway at takeoff speed, completely blind to what's ahead. The Pan Am crew sees the KLM's landing lights appear out of the fog, coming straight at them. The Pan Am pilot screams and shoves the throttles forward, trying to swerve off the runway. The KLM pilot, seeing the other 747 at the last possible second, pulls back violently on the controls, trying to lift off over it. He almost makes it. The nose clears the Pan Am jet, but the landing gear and engines smash into the top of the other plane, ripping it apart. The KLM plane stalls and crashes further down the runway, exploding in a massive fireball. In total, 583 people lost their lives. It's a chilling lesson in the importance of clear communication in aviation. You can't talk about aviation mysteries without talking about the one, the only, Amelia Earhart. She was more than just a pilot. She was a rock star, a global icon, a pioneer for women everywhere, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. In 1937, she set out to do what no one had ever done before, circumnavigate the globe at the equator. It was the ultimate challenge, the final frontier of aviation at the time. She and her navigator, Fred Noonan, were on the final, most difficult leg of their journey. They had successfully flown over 22,000 miles, crossing the Atlantic, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. The next leg was a massive 2,556-mile flight across the Pacific Ocean, from Lae, New Guinea, to a tiny speck of land called Howland Island. This island is minuscule, just 1.5 miles long and half a mile wide. Finding it in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean was like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. It was an incredible navigational challenge, relying on celestial navigation and radio signals. On July 2nd, 1937, they took off. For hours, they were in radio contact with a US Coast Guard cutter, the Itasca, which was waiting for them near Howland Island. The radio transmissions were spotty, filled with static, but they indicated Earhart and Noonan were getting close. Earhart reported cloudy weather, making celestial navigation difficult. Her final transmissions were increasingly desperate. "We must be on you, but cannot see you," she said. "Gas is running low." Her last confirmed message was, "We are running online, north and south." And then, just like that, silence. She and Noonan and their Lockheed Electra 10E plane vanished. The US Navy and Coast Guard launched the biggest sea and air search in American history up to that point. They searched for 2 weeks, covering 250,000 square miles of ocean, but found absolutely nothing. No oil slick, no debris, no trace of the plane or its famous crew. The theories about what happened are endless. The official explanation is that they simply ran out of fuel, crashed into the ocean, and sank. But other, more tantalizing theories persist. Did they land on another uninhabited island, like Gardner Island, now Nikumaroro, and live as castaways? Some artifacts found there, including a woman's shoe and a piece of aluminum, have fueled this theory for decades. Or did they get captured by the Japanese? The mystery of Amelia Earhart's final flight is one of the most enduring of the 20th century, a story of ambition, courage, and a disappearance that still captures our imagination. Okay, this one sounds like the plot of a James Bond movie, but I promise you it's real. It involves a mid-air collision, a jettisoned nuclear bomb, and a weapon of mass destruction that is to this day lost. Yes, you heard me right. There is a nuclear bomb sitting somewhere off the coast of Georgia, and nobody knows exactly where it is. The story starts on February 5th, 1958, during the height of the Cold War. A US Air Force B-47 Stratojet bomber was on a simulated combat mission out of Homestead Air Force Base in Florida. This wasn't just any training flight. It was carrying a very real 7,600-pound Mark 15 hydrogen bomb. It was all part of the Strategic Air Command's mission to be ready for nuclear war at a moment's notice. The bomber was flying at 36,000 feet over the coast of Georgia when disaster struck. Out of the darkness, an F-86 Sabre fighter jet on a separate training mission collided with it. The collision was devastating. The fighter jet lost a wing and its pilot ejected, parachuting to safety. The B-47 bomber was severely damaged. One of its engines was nearly torn off and the wing was mangled. The pilot, Major Howard Richardson, fought to keep the massive, crippled plane in the air. He knew he had to try and land it, but he had a huge problem. The 7,600-pound hydrogen bomb still attached to his plane. He was worried that if he tried to land, the bomb could break loose and detonate in a crash, causing a catastrophe. So, with permission from his superiors, Major Richardson made a difficult decision. He flew out over the Atlantic to a spot in Wassaw Sound near Tybee Island, Georgia, and he jettisoned the bomb. He watched it fall into the water below. He was then able to wrestle the damaged bomber back to Hunter Air Force Base and land it safely. An incredible piece of flying. But now, the military had a new problem. They had to find a hydrogen bomb at the bottom of the ocean. A massive 9-week search was launched. Navy divers, ships with sonar, and troops scouring the marshes all came up empty-handed. They never found it. The Pentagon has always maintained that the bomb did not have its plutonium core installed, so it couldn't create a nuclear explosion, but it still contains a lot of conventional explosives and uranium. To this day, the Tybee bomb, as it's known, is still out there. It's one of several broken arrows, the official term for accidents involving nuclear weapons, but it's arguably the most famous lost nuke of them all. Somewhere in the mud of Wassaw Sound lies a relic of the Cold War. Imagine you're on a flight to New Zealand, you've just settled in, maybe you're dozing off, and then suddenly, BAM! A sound like a bomb going off, the cabin fills with a roar of wind and flying debris, and the person sitting next to you is gone. This isn't a nightmare. This was the reality for the passengers of United Airlines Flight 811 on February 24, 1989. The Boeing 747 had just taken off from Honolulu and was climbing over the Pacific Ocean. What happened was a catastrophic failure known as an explosive decompression. The forward cargo door, a massive piece of the fuselage, suddenly blew off the aircraft. The difference in pressure between the inside of the cabin and the outside air at 22,000 feet was so immense that it ripped a giant hole in the side of the plane. The suction was incredible. 10 seats were ripped from the cabin floor and sucked out into the night sky. Tragically, 9 passengers were pulled out of the plane with them. 1 minute they were safely in their seats, the next they were gone, falling into the Pacific Ocean. For the people left on board, it was pure chaos and terror. The wind was screaming through the gaping hole, debris was flying everywhere, and the plane was severely damaged. 2 of the engines on the right wing had ingested debris from the cargo door and failed, catching fire. The pilots were now flying a crippled jumbo jet with a hole the size of a garage door in its side. Captain David Cronin and his crew were absolute heroes. They immediately began an emergency descent, trying to get to a lower altitude where people could breathe. They had to deal with the fires, the damaged controls, and the sheer terror of the situation. It took incredible skill and nerve. They managed to turn the massive, crippled plane around and head back towards Honolulu. It was a terrifying 14-minute flight back to safety. The crew managed to land the plane safely back in Honolulu, a feat of airmanship that saved the lives of the 328 remaining passengers and 18 crew members. The investigation later found that the cargo door had a design flaw in its locking mechanism. This wasn't the first time it had been an issue, but the warnings had not led to a mandatory fix. The tragedy of Flight 811 finally forced Boeing and the FAA to act, leading to a redesign of the cargo door systems on all 747s. It was a horrifying incident that, thankfully, led to crucial safety improvements for everyone who flies today. Okay, we've had mysteries, we've had tragedies, now let's get into the truly bizarre. This is a story that sounds like a headline from The Onion, but it actually happened. It's the story of how a bear, yes, a bear, caused a plane crash. This isn't a big passenger jet, but a small cargo plane, a private Learjet 25. The date is August 19, 1985, and the flight is taking off from a suburb of Denver, Colorado. So, here's the setup. The plane is supposed to be transporting machine parts to Oakland, California, but the pilots, for reasons that are still a little fuzzy, probably involving a shady deal and some extra cash, agreed to transport some unscheduled cargo. This cargo was a 400-pound black bear, and not just the bear, but also its 200-pound cage. They loaded the bear into the cargo space behind the cockpit. You can already see where this is going, right? The plane takes off, everything seems fine, but shortly after takeoff, something goes wrong. The plane starts behaving erratically, and then it just drops out of the sky. It crashes into a reservoir, killing both pilots. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found the wreckage and made a very, very strange discovery. Among the twisted metal of the plane, they found the body of a 400-pound black bear. The cage was open and damaged. The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, had to figure this out. Their official report is one for the ages. They concluded that the cage, which was not properly secured, likely shifted during takeoff. This might have caused the cage door to open, leaving a 400-pound bear waking up in the back of a small, noisy, vibrating jet is probably not going to be in a good mood. It's a recipe for absolute chaos. The NTSB determined that the bear getting loose was the most probable cause of the crash. They believe the bear, panicked and confused, likely moved around the cabin, causing a massive shift in the plane's center of gravity, making it impossible to control. We'll never know the exact sequence of events in that cockpit, but the official cause of the crash is, essentially, bear. It's a cautionary tale about why you don't smuggle bears on airplanes. Our final story is less of a mystery and more of a bizarre, sad and incredibly dangerous tale of heartbreak. It's about a man who stole a Boeing 707, a massive 4-engine jetliner, all in a desperate attempt to win back his wife. This is the story of Reginaldo de Murca, a 28-year-old mechanic and flight engineer for the now-defunct Brazilian airline, VASP. It's September 29, 1988, and Reginaldo is having a very, very bad day. His wife had just left him, and he was completely distraught. So, he concocted a plan. A truly insane plan. He went to the airport in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, where a VASP Boeing 707 cargo plane was parked. Using his knowledge as a mechanic, he managed to get into the cockpit and start the engines. He had never flown a 707 before. He had some flight engineer experience, but he was not a pilot. Yet somehow, he managed to taxi this giant plane and take off into the night sky. His goal? To crash the plane into the office building in São Paulo where his wife's boss worked, a man he blamed for their breakup. He flew the 707 towards São Paulo, radioing air traffic control, making his intentions clear. He was on a suicide mission. The controllers tried to reason with him, to talk him down, but he was inconsolable. He circled the city, a massive, fuel-laden jet in the hands of an unstable, untrained man, creating a terrifying situation for everyone on the ground. After realizing he couldn't pinpoint the exact building in the dark, he changed his plan. He decided to fly to his hometown of Goiânia and crash the plane into his mother's house. I know, it just gets crazier. He flew towards Goiânia, but as he neared the city, he started to have second thoughts, or perhaps started to run low on fuel. He began performing reckless, dangerous maneuvers over the city, barrel rolls and steep dives in a 707. It's something that plane is absolutely not designed to do. Eventually, with fuel critically low, he attempted to land at the Goiânia airport, but with no experience, he botched the landing. The plane ran off the runway, broke apart, and caught fire. Incredibly, against all odds, Reginaldo de Murca survived the crash. He was pulled from the wreckage and arrested. It was a desperate, crazy, and unbelievably dangerous act fueled by heartbreak, a stark reminder of the human element in aviation and how personal turmoil can lead to unimaginable consequences. A truly bizarre end to our list. And that's a wrap. Wow, from lost nukes and ghost planes to DB Cooper and a bear. A bear. Aviation history is filled with some of the most unbelievable stories you could ever imagine. It's a world of incredible triumphs of engineering and courage, but as we've seen today, it's also a world of profound mystery and sometimes just plain weirdness. They show us that even in our highly technical world, there are still so many unanswered questions out there. I really hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the strange side of the skies. It's been fascinating, chilling, and a little bit crazy to explore these with you. Thank you so much for watching, for sticking with me through all 10 of these mind-blowing tales. Your support means the world to me, and it's what makes creating these videos so much fun. I get to learn about this stuff right along with you, and it's just the best. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think? Which story shocked you the most? And like I said at the beginning, if you know of any other bizarre aviation mysteries that we missed, please drop them in the comments below. And of course, if you had a good time, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure.